All right, Packers, this is almost silly how short this is. Looking back, I could have rolled these events out slightly differently, but these last three events on our big timeline are actually really important for us to understand why it's even worth studying history at all. So this isn't going to take very long, but we're going to follow that same format that we've been following here our first 3 weeks together. You have the notes sheet open. I'm going to give you what to put into the blanks. And then I'm going to ask you a couple of quick questions just to double check you took in all that information. Could you go and make a Quizlet deck about this based on last week's skill? I hope so. And the reason that it's really important that we do this is these events aren't going to go away. This isn't like Unit 1 stuff and then we move on. In a lot of ways, this is like math in that you have to be able to do the beginning part to kind of climb up the ladder. So these events aren't going away, and it's really important that we keep them straight and we're familiar with them. Either they're a review or it's brand new stuff, right? So I love Hamilton the musical. That's why I keep putting that picture up there. And if you're familiar with this musical, that's super popular. And it's on Disney Plus now, so you can check it out if you're so lucky to have access to that. But the one of the big questions in Hamilton is who gets to tell the story. For a long time, this founding father, if you like that term or don't like that term, that person who was around at the beginning of the United States, named Alexander Hamilton, he was kind of laughed at almost as a joke because he dressed super fancy and he got shot by the vice president. But some researchers, some historians, and then Lin-Manuel Miranda told this different story about him, where a lot of people realized for the first time that he was an absolute genius that helped build the United States at a time when it needed it. So we want to fully understand the full story of the United States as best we can, which is impossible in 1 year, but it's a start. Just like we have to hear Spanish to truly understand how to speak it, we have to look at this big picture. Now, if you ever don't like or feel differently about the way that I'm describing these events, that's good. You should bring it up because my job as a history teacher is not to tell you what to think, but to encourage you to think. And sometimes I do that by saying things that maybe you are unfamiliar with or that you even disagree with. And then we start thinking and talking about it. Again, and I'll say this a lot during the school year, my job is not to tell you how to think. My job is to encourage you to think, right? And as you're taking notes, either on your notebook or on the digital sheet or whatever works best for you, feel free to hit pause and come back to it. So this event 21 is the election of Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was president from 1981 to 1989. So a two-term president. He won re-election. And what this is really important, especially moving forward, understanding where we're at today in this election year. It was a new direction of the conservative movement and the Republican Party with Ronald Reagan being elected president. So Ronald Reagan has a specific set of beliefs that he champions, and it's generally called conservative politics, which is slightly different than the Republican Party. And we can see that really outplaying right now because the things that Ronald Reagan, who's a Republican, wanted to have happen are very different than what Donald Trump, who is now in the Republican Party, wants. So we have these different words, conservative and Republican Party. It would almost be like a sports team. Are the players on the Minnesota Timberwolves now related to Timberwolves from the 1990s? They're related, but they're pretty different players. They play a different kind of basketball, right? The same thing is true with politics today. Was Ronald Reagan related to Donald Trump? In some ways, they both originally made money by being on TV. Ronald Reagan was a movie star. Donald Trump made money in real estate, but really became known outside of New York by his time on TV. So there are some similarities, but very different. So this is where the conservative movement really changes what it means, and Ronald Reagan is forever tied to that. He wasn't the only one who was in charge of this. People who had the ideas, like William F. Buckley down here, he really had the ideas of what it meant to be conservative in the United States, but Ronald Reagan was kind of the spokesperson, if you will. This one isn't a surprise, but it's an important one because it's really changed so much of what's happened in your life. I like to ask students to raise their hand if they know someone who in their lifetime has been in the military overseas, that is, has been in the military and has gone outside of the United States. And usually there's anywhere between 30 to 50% of people raise their hand and say, I know somebody who served in Iraq or served in Afghanistan. And we can trace those ideas back to September 11th, 2001. We just had the anniversary of it. And this group called Al Qaeda executed a terrorist attack, killing almost 3,000 Americans that day. And the so what is that then the United States shortly thereafter invaded Afghanistan. Not because Afghanistan had done the terrorist attacks, but they had allowed this terrorist group, who's mostly made up of people from Saudi Arabia, but all over. They were home. They were finding a home in Afghanistan. But Al Qaeda, founded by somebody from Saudi Arabia, who's technically friends with the United States, the country of Saudi Arabia, technically friends with the government of the United States, was actually where Al Qaeda got its view from. So there's a picture from the day of. Here's a picture of the memorial today called Ground Zero in New York City, and then the building that was built just adjacent to that memorial. Now it's called One World Trade Center. And then finally, the Great Recession of 2008. So what happened as Barack Obama is becoming the first person of color, the first African American, the first multiracial person to be elected president, a lot of firsts in his election. As he's transitioning from the candidate Barack Obama to the president-elect Barack Obama, and then fully becoming president in January of 2009, there was a huge economic crisis, which at the time we were told, well, this is going to be the worst economic crisis of your lifetime. Remains to be seen, because obviously right now our economy is really struggling. But where it started was corruption in the housing market. So in the 2000s, some companies were finding people who didn't have enough money to buy a house. They were giving them money to buy a house. And then when things went wrong with the economy, those people said, well, I don't have enough money for this house. And everything was linked together. And so there were these huge issues. And our government came in and gave a lot of tax dollars, a lot of Americans' money that the government had collected, and gave it to these huge banks and these big companies that were suddenly struggling because all these people who had been told they should buy a house but didn't have enough money, that were finding out that they weren't able to continue to pay the banks. The banks were in trouble, so the companies that worked with the banks were in trouble, and it just went dominoes down the street. So it was triggered by corruption. That means like cheating in the housing market, not by the individual people. They were following the rules, but the people who were trying to get them to buy the houses. The U.S. economy and the banking system nearly collapsed. And lots of people were upset because money went in large part to these large companies, not necessarily to individual people. So that was the Great Recession that really happened at the same time as Barack Obama became president. And then President Obama had to spend really the rest of his presidency trying to build up the economy from its really rough shape when he took office. The last thing that I want you to do, and I really want you to do this, I'm going to ask this either as a thought for the day or I'm going to put something on Schoology. I haven't decided yet, but I do want you to take a minute and think, what is an event that you know about from U.S. history that was left off our list, right? So you could pause, you could go back and look at our other lists, you could just take 2 deep breaths and think about what you know about U.S. history or what your grandpa or grandma tells you about. And if you're totally stumped and you want to put the Vikings 4 Super Bowls, that's great. If you want to put your birth when you were born, that's great. But I think a lot of you know things about U.S. history that maybe didn't come up. 2 that I could have put up there. You don't have to write these down. I'm just giving you examples. The Stono Rebellion was the largest rebellion by people held as slaves in the United States, what became the United States in 1739. And they were yelling as they were rebelling and killing their owners. They were saying liberty, which of course is the same thing that the colonists would then be yelling against the British. We want liberty, that famous saying, give me liberty or give me death. People held as slaves were actually ahead of the curve on that. Or somebody could say, George Washington, our first president, was really brave and bold, and he stopped being president. He didn't run for a 3rd term because he didn't want the country to have people who were president for too long. So he said, even though I could win until I die, I'm just going to serve 8 years and I'm going to stop. And the speech that he gave was beautiful. And everybody up until the 1930s followed his example. And now you have to follow his example. That's the law. Great. So now you'll have the notes. You'll be able to use them to answer those quick questions. And then this last one, this kind of made up number 24, we'll come back to in class and talk about. Thanks for watching, and go Pack. Went on a little long. I don't know if I'm going to go back and fix that. You're just going to have that awkward silence at the end, I think.